Hey, for all the people joining live, welcome. Just finishing setup. There's Brent's beautiful face. I see it in the in the video. Okay. So we're good on Facebook. All right. Radio starting recording in 3, 2, and 1. Good morning, evening, afternoon, spiritual loving beings. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to another heart broadcast, loving broadcast from my spirit to yours. You've joined us for a loving discussion today about all things ego, free will, and presence. Embracing the journey of beautiful self-discovery and everything in between. I have a powerful soul and man on the show to talk about all these topics today. But before I get to him and his art and his beautiful wisdom, I want to remind everyone that's joining live or listening to the podcast, if you enjoy this conversation today, it hits your heart, please share this out with a lover, a friend, a family member, and leave your feedback over on Apple and Spotify. That helps the show. It also helps me pick topics that you want to hear more about. If you are joining live, please leave your comments as we flow, either on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we'd love to incorporate your beautiful essence into this conversation as well. The powerful man I have on the show today is the beautiful Brent Perkins. Brent wrote a magical book that we're going to talk about to a degree today. And Brent is a loving father of 2 amazing daughters, a lover of life, nature, and community. And he's a big, powerful spiritual heart. Brent, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Yeah, really excited to be here. Thank you.
How are you feeling, Brent, before we get started and we dive deep into spiritual world?
I'm feeling really grounded at the moment.
We were talking before we started recording. A big reason for that groundedness is the masculine, is the divine masculine, and the balance between throughout our day, getting stuff done, and then also bringing in the feminine of being and presence and stillness. And I know that's a big part of what you talk about in your book and this conversation we're going to have today around free will. So let's start there, Brent. What do you think is the importance at the moment of really being mindful of adding into our day presence and beingness? What comes up for you?
Yeah, this is a dance that I continue to work on daily. But as I showed up for most of my life, it was in the weaker side of masculine and the feminine side. And what I mean by that is I don't really subscribe to the toxic definition people talk about today. I think it's related to behavior, not to actual masculinity or femininity. But the unhealthy side of masculinity is just driving and chasing and not slowing down, not being present. And the weaker side to the feminine is just giving up, having no opinion, doing whatever somebody else wants, not having our own boundaries, just kind of giving up and relinquishing. And I lived in both those two worlds, one foot in, a corporate career and one foot at home. And neither of those were how I choose to show up today, which is quite different.
Which I feel flows on to the next question I want to ask you, Brent. A big part of your book and the sort of message that you're standing in at the moment is this topic of free will, right? And I want to speak about divine will and that higher good and that higher will, a bit later. We'll get to that. But just to give a definition, because I think definitions are important for people to really anchor to, and then we can bounce from there. How do you define free will, Brent, in your opinion?
Yeah. So free will is so much more granular than we typically look at it. And I didn't understand this until really the last year and actually going through writing this book, where you look at free will and it's like, I want to vote a certain way. I want sushi tonight, or I want Mexican food, or I want these bigger decisions that kind of just define me and who I am and my friend group and where I spend my time. I do yoga. No, I play basketball. Yes, that's free will, but what we forget is that free will is choice at every level of our life. And it struck me one day as I was doing some research on the book that it was Einstein who said, this life is an illusion, or this world is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And as I really thought about what did he mean by that? I'm looking at you, you've got headphones on, those are real. You've got a microphone, it works. It's picking up your voice. It's broadcasting it to everybody listening. But what they hear, how they hear it, how they interpret your smile, the squint of your eyes, these are all little baby tiny choices we have, but they feed into how do we interpret situations. And because we can all interpret them differently, and we only know life through these five senses, right? That's how we show up to the world. It turns out that these real objects are set in a stage, and this stage is the illusion, right?
Yeah.
Because we can all interpret it differently. And our interpretations, those are delusions. And we can get into the deeper definition of that, but that's the level of free will of choice that we're talking about here.
Yeah, let's get into it right now, Brent, because I think I don't want to. I was one of the reasons I was so excited about your book and you in general and the message that you're sharing is I often speak about on the show for people tuning in. I subscribe to a lot of the Vedic teachings of the world, the Vedic worldview, and the Vedic worldview teaches very similar to what you're saying, that there is no outside reality. There is just the reality that we create through our inner state of consciousness that we project through our current identity or our current persona or the current reality that we think we are, right? So there is no outside world, but it is really a reflection of our inner state of consciousness. So let me throw it back to you, Brent. If you agree with that, and I feel that you do, why is that relevant for the person listening, moving throughout their day and wanting to maybe awaken, maybe wanting to heal, maybe wanting to bring in deeper relationships? What is the significance of this?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. And thank you for the question. I do want to give a little more context and color around it, because I do agree with you. And I do study some of the Vedic teachings, and especially in my own meditation practice, which I've had for about the last year and a half. But it's been really hard to sit here and say nothing's real and that it's all in our mind. And I know that at its core, but at the same time, like my ego, my body, my human soul doesn't want to operate that way. So it's probably why I put this definition around it and wrote a book about it. It was for me, really. And the subtitle of the book is the Art of Self-Delusion. And so I reframed a little bit about what the Vedic teachings are really for me, so I could have sanity going through this world. And I think it will help other people too. And that is that in the context of what we just talked about, which is, our senses are interpreting the illusion, the stage that we're playing in, we're dancing in. We can choose what the interpretation is. And it's happened to me.
And that's our free will to a degree.
That's our free will.
Yes.
And it's happened to me so many times. I mean, whether you talk about politics, where, when you're 18 years old, you believe something, and when you get into your mid-20s, you believe something else, in your mid-30s something else. It shifts. And does it make what you believed early on not true for you? No, it's just you believe something different. Your truth is shifting,
Yes.
but it doesn't make it less real.
No.
And that's, whether you're talking about politics, whether you're talking about, I hated mushrooms growing up. Why do I love them now? Right? I used to hate sushi. Why do I love it now? These things can shift on us. We can walk away from a friend of mine I had dinner with, and she walked away, or I went to the bathroom, and while I was gone, she got a phone call. And when I came back, I didn't know she had a phone call. But when I came back, everything had changed. Her persona, her demeanor, all how she was kind of like tight and angry. And I left like really, I didn't enjoy the dinner, right?
Yeah.
And I ran into another friend of mine. He's like, I saw you there. Did you know what happened? I'm like, what do you mean? Do I know what happened? Your friend got a call, and it turned out that her brother had passed away.
Yeah.
And so my whole interpretation of that evening shifted. So the point is, if we can hold these two truths, whether 10 years apart, 10 minutes apart, they're all delusions.
Yeah.
And we have a choice at any given moment. What are we stepping into? What are we going to choose to build the story of our life?
Yeah.
The past is our past, but it's still, it builds this web that our entire life sits on.
Yeah.
And it's always up to us.
Yeah.
It's always our choice. So to answer your question, how does it help
impact
everybody?
Yeah.
It means that you're never stuck. You're never forced into a situation or believing a certain way, or it allows you to step out of victimhood and say, okay, these things are happening, but gosh, what's the complete opposite side of these? What if that was true?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Everything would be different, at least in my brain.
Well, there's so much in this, Brent, and I think this topic, I think that's why I like it so much, because there's so many little different angles. But I just want to underline something for everyone tuning in, with the example that you gave of that friend, that through your state of consciousness, your current reality, you were projecting that onto her and creating something that was technically a delusion, right? She was going through her own state. And I underline it because I see this in my day, right? I see this through, text messages or emails or a social media DM that will come in. And at the end of my day, I'll be at a different consciousness state based off how tired I am, based off everything that's happened. I will look at that message, and I'll pause for a moment, and I'll notice how I'm reacting to that message. I'll then go to sleep, look at the same message with the same words, and it affects me differently. The message hasn't changed, but my consciousness state has changed. And this is, this is, I think, really a big part of the delusion and the game that we're talking about here. But I want to ask a definition from you here, Brent, before we can keep going, because a lot of these delusions, and another way I would describe them is stories, belief systems, thought forms, they exist in the ego. And I'm wondering, how do you define the ego?
Yeah, I don't believe these are necessarily my definitions, but where I've come to be comfortable with how I understand it is that the ego is what drives this human body. It is what is in touch with. It only knows anything through the five senses, and it stops there. And while there's a connection to the higher self, it doesn't understand how to operate from there. It can just take direction if it can get it in the right way. Right?
Yeah.
And it's something I learned in my life, which is, instead of hating the ego, And so many, and I know you talk about this in your book too. It's similar to you and I, or somewhere, a place where we resonate, is that so many people, including me, man, I did this for a while, just hate on the ego, judge myself, call myself names. I even got to a point where I named my ego a really not so nice name. Every time, a thought I didn't want, or I knew it was reacting, I would just shame it. And until I got to a point where I could give it a hug and just say, you know what? I see where you're coming from. Thank you for trying to protect me. I got this, though. I got this. That's when
Things shift.
that's when things shift.
Yeah. You bring the ego, or you come back to an understanding and a remembering, I think is the better way to say it, that the ego was never against you, right? It was never, and we'll talk about this a little bit because this will lead me into my next question. The ego is not the problem. The ego is what I would add to your lovely definition is that the ego is our self-expression, right? It's our individual identity. The problem is not the individual identity, the structure of the individual identity. It's what the identity is currently identified by, right? Am I identified by my inner child wound of abandonment? Am I identified by the limiting belief of I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not valuable? Or am I identified by I'm abundant, I'm powerful, I'm strong, I'm confident, I'm loving, right? Same ego structure, different contents, right? Do you resonate with that? Do you agree with that?
100%, yeah, 100%. 100%. It's I mean, at the end of the day, the ego's job is to drive this body to keep us safe. And there's really cool books out there like The Body Keeps the Score and other things written around how it's just like any human, things that happen to it. It's doing its best to catalog these things and understand what to do next to keep us safe. So if we're not in touch with our higher self, if we haven't done the work, if we haven't released some of these traumas, whether it be in this lifetime or intergenerational, they creep up and they become part of the programming of the ego because that's all it knows until we acknowledge it and release it.
Yeah. Okay. So with that foundation and that understanding, just for everyone tuning in, I let those go. I use my free will to maybe do some inner work. I clear some stuff up. And let's say I'm a more integrated human and I have some belief systems of expansion and positivity and love. The question I want to ask you now, Brent, is how would you define the difference between free will and divine will, or a higher will, or the will of our higher power that we may or may not connect to? Is there a difference in your opinion?
Yes and no. This becomes a more spiritual answer. Yeah,
only place I know how to be, my friend. Keep going.
Yeah, with my own personal belief that we are all one and all are part of a higher energy source that ultimately are a fractal of the same thing. So we're all a small piece of each other and the highest power. Yes, we have a choice. And it's about remembering. And the choice comes in that we get to remember in our own way, in our own time, the same thing that we're all ultimately driving towards.
Yeah. What is that thing, Brent?
It's remembering that at the core, all there is love.
Mm.
And that drives everything.
Mm. Just sitting in that for a moment and the presence of that recognition. For people tuning in, what I'd add to this divine will distinction, and again, this flows on to another question I want to pose you, is I've often found moving beyond free will into divine will gives us the opportunity to apply the spiritual law or the spiritual practice of surrender, right? Surrendering into something more. And when I say something more, and I say this for all of the people tuning in that may have religious conceptions of this, you're not surrendering to something more that is outside of you. God, oneness, the universe source is outside of you. Technically, it's everything. But when I say you're surrendering to something more, you're surrendering to the moreness that is you, that is beyond the delusions, in your words, that I would say that we often become defined by. So, one, Brent, what are your thoughts on this? And two, what you talk about surrender in your book. What is its application here in your perspective?
So for me, as I've learned how to live what I call a bold life, bold in body, bold in mind, bold in spirit, the pathway there, the first step for me is becoming present. And I think this is what you were alluding to earlier. You know, stepping away from the past and those delusions that can shift on us and change, and out of the future, which hasn't happened yet, into the present. That's free will. But when we surrender at the same time, so for me, it's showing up in surrender. That's that divine will you're talking about. Because it's our choice to say, I don't have expectations. I don't have assumptions. I am going to be here in the moment. That's my choice. And I'm going to give away all that control. That's the surrender piece. And that's where you allow the divine piece that we can't fully understand. We don't know what's happening, why it's happening, how it's happening. We never really will. So that's where we combine what we can do at the ego level, which is just show up, and then surrender to what the divine level has for us.
I say this as someone who, often gets stuck in his own delusions, but what you're saying, it makes it all sound so easy. It makes it all sound so,
Yeah, that's funny.
yeah, right? It makes it sound,
Not easy.
no, not easy at all. And I just want to underline that for, again, people tuning in. It's not easy. But, and let's go here next. I don't think we want this beautiful free will, divine will, this journey that we're on. I don't think we want it to be easy. Let's speak about that. What are your thoughts on, the challenges and the pains that we face and their role within this bigger conversation?
Yeah, I mean, easy is different than simple, right?
Yeah.
And almost everything that we strive to do that are spiritually we deeply desire to do, and as simple as hitting the gym and working out or eating right. I mean, that entire spectrum, it's all simple. Eat right, don't go to McDonald's. Okay, it doesn't mean it's easy. You're hungry, you drive past it, you want food. Same thing happens spiritually. It's a simple path, but man, it's not easy because life happens and the ego happens. And if it was easy, we wouldn't have the same experiences. And I can only speak for my own life.
Yeah.
Every time I've failed, every time I've fallen flat on my face, and I've fallen on my face a bunch of times, not just skin my knees, I mean, smacked my face on the ground. Those are the moments. Yeah, you cry for a minute and you feel sorry for yourself for 2 minutes, then you breathe through it and you know exactly where to go next.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many different places, from the divorce I went through the more than 2 companies, I think 3 companies that failed underneath, my tutelage and my leadership, that, where I screwed up in being a parent. If these things hadn't happened, I would not know how to show up how I am today. I would not have learned the lessons. Like, easy doesn't work.
Yeah.
We don't actually learn,
Yeah.
you know?
Not only, so I agree. I could not agree more with everything you're saying. I often refer to it as like the pain teacher. The pain teacher comes in to help us evolve to the point where we've just ignored everything. So pain comes into, okay, now you need to do something. So I think it's all there. It's there for the experience and the expansion. But I think an even deeper sort of resonance to it that I often share with people I work with is, you refer to that truth that we're all coming back to, that we all share, is the recognition of love, right? If that is the deepest truth, then how can we apply that to all these different situations? And how I apply that, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is these are all different opportunities for us to experience love, right? All these different opportunities bring us a tapestry of love. All of these different pains bring us opportunities to reacquaint oneself with a different dimension of love. Does that resonate, Brent?
Yeah, it actually speaks to my own personal spiritual beliefs, which are that as we come back, as our soul is and has been in existence forever, is eternal. As we choose to take on a body and come back into this life, and learn and live some of these lessons, there's a lot of hardship. There's death. There's abuse. There's trauma. There's pain, as you refer to. And from a humanistic standpoint, it's hard to understand. Why would this happen to a kid? Why would somebody like, Hitler have to hurt so many people, millions of people? Why would all these, from a human standpoint, bad things happen? And if we look beyond us, if we understand that this isn't our first trip around this, this sun or on this earth, and we're here to remember in different stages and peel back different layers, every lesson here is to teach us about love. And one of my favorite sayings from my meditation teacher, she uses a pretty extreme example because Hitler's one that, that touches a lot of people in a really raw way. And I don't know the full answer here, so this is really just an analogy. But there was a story that she told around, God saying that, what if, take Viktor Frankl. I think most of your listeners are probably familiar with his story in A Man's Search for Meaning. He found unconditional love for himself in his trials and tribulations there, which he would have never have had happen. And I'm sure there are many other stories we don't even know about through these very horrific things. And yet, from God's standpoint, this kind of parable is told that, what if you had spent 122 lifetimes on this earth trying to learn a lesson? And me, not understanding anything cosmically
Mm.
from the divine level, got in your way and said, that looks like it hurts. Don't do that to him. And that
Mm.
pain is exactly what you were waiting for
Mm.
through the millennia to teach you a lesson at a divine level.
Yeah.
And from a human level, I got in your way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's
And
beautiful.
I'll leave this last thing in the parable was, it was God saying, yeah, Hitler was horrible. It was horrific. We'll never say anything different. And no souls were harmed during the Hitler experiment.
I can feel a reaction to that.
Mm.
Right. And I mean, I want to go back to, there was a beautiful parable, my friend. Thank you for sharing it. I want to go back to your Viktor Frankl example. And for people that have read that book, definitely, and haven't read it, definitely go look up Man's Search for Meaning, because it highlights another example of what we spoke about earlier of Viktor Frankl, despite everything that was happening in his reality, was centering in his own space of inner peace, right? He was coming back to his own place of inner power, despite how everything, as we can all imagine, everything in his real reality, for people that are listening, I'm using my fingers, was telling him otherwise. He was creating an internal state of strength and power and stability, right? Which goes into what I want to speak about now here, Brent. And I want to ground. We've spent a lot of time in the spiritual heights. I want to ground here now in some practicality for people tuning in that have listened and they're understanding this dance between free will, divine will. They understand the ego and these delusions that the ego can be lost in. What are some practices that maybe you implement or you speak about in your book to help us unpack some of these self-delusions and help us come back to whether it's the divine will, peace, stability, balance? What are some practices that come up in your mind?
Yeah. So Byron Katie's work has been really, really helpful in my own journey. And the 4 questions she challenges, you to ask yourself around a situation. Is it true? Are you sure it's true? What if the opposite were true? And as you sit with those, as I sit with those questions on a lot of things, man, it powerfully turns it around and gives me possibility, right? Another thing I use all the time, and I don't know who said this, but these situations come up and it's like, could be good, could be bad, who knows? There's an old parable that goes with that too. And both of these methodologies or both of these tools, they at their core, they're the same thing in that they allow us to sit in curiosity, and finding a place of where we can be curious. It diffuses whatever we're feeling in the moment, right? It allows us to sidestep, emotions we can't control. They happen to us, but feelings happen from us, right? That's the choice part to the feelings that we can't control.
Yeah.
The feelings are how we express the emotions that come upon us. And curiosity lets us step away from just the automatic anger. I'm going to yell. No, I'm going to get curious.
Yeah.
Express it differently.
I'm so happy that you added in the Byron Katie work, right? The testing and the double checking what is the real reality and what is not. And I want to add a piece to this and get your thoughts on it. You've been sharing these beautiful parables, and I'll share a quote back. One of my favorites that I often share on the show is from Rumi. Rumi shares in the quote, out beyond all wrongdoings and right doings, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And often when I think and feel into that field, it is that deeper state of, as we've been talking about today, the love that we are. So a practical way to cultivate a connection to that field beyond the current right doing or mostly wrong doing that we're getting stuck in is asking the question, what would love do? Despite this positive thought, despite this negative thought, if I was to take a step in this moment through love, what would that look like? Would it be one of smallness? Would it be one of turning away? Would it be one of fear? Would it be one of disconnection? Usually it's none of those things, right? Usually it's the courage and the confidence to do the thing. What are your thoughts on this, my friend?
I find, yes, and I find when I go to that place, I actually often find no answer because love doesn't actually care what we do, and there is no one answer. So someone else said, on the other side of a truth is another truth, right? And it just keeps rolling. And more often than not, at least in my own relationships, specifically relationships with other humans, more intimate ones, more personal ones, you can't go wrong. You can't choose wrong.
Yeah.
When you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when you are just honest to the core.
Yeah. That's the reason there's no answer, right? I just want to make that clear for people hearing. There's not no answer because you don't deserve an answer or you're broken or you're unworthy. No, it's literally because whatever you choose, when you zoom all the way out, you're loved, right? And I just want to let's just hone into this point for a second, Brent, because it's so important for people to hear. Because I know a lot of my listeners tuned into my story, and I grew up religious. I grew up with the teaching that if I did not do the right things, then there is a destination coming for me that I may and most likely will not enjoy, right? I will be condemned and tested and marked wrong or right and go somewhere. That's not what you're saying. That's not the story here. So I'm wondering if you can, let's go a little bit deeper into this, because these limiting beliefs of condemnation and being persecuted for not making the right or wrong choice, it appears in many different ways. It's not just religious. So what are your thoughts on this, Brent?
As we talked about earlier, it's part of our journey to make mistakes, get it wrong, fall down. And if we don't, through love, allow that to happen, find the joy in that, then we've missed the point. And where we get ourselves in trouble, at least where I get myself in trouble, speaking for myself, is holding on. Like when I do make a mistake, when I say something that I realize, oh, there's my lesson. I judged myself, or I judged somebody else, or I made an assumption, or it's holding on to the control that we are embarrassed to be wrong versus celebrating, I just learned a lesson by being wrong. That was 100% love, because there really is no right and wrong. There is on the human level and some of the rules and laws we put in place, but from at a higher level, there is no right and wrong. So it's celebrating the awakening, the remembering, the relearning of all the things that maybe seem bad or incorrect or wrong on the surface, but they're really just love.
Yeah. And this is so much more than, I just want to say this here, and I have a couple more questions for you, Brent, before we wrap up. But I just want to say this is not just a spiritual, mystical, woo-woo understanding. It is all those things. But it's also, what does this embodiment look like? What does it look like to be in this state? Well, it looks like someone that's not getting stuck in the victim, right? It looks like someone that's not getting stuck in this life is happening to me, right? It looks like someone that's embodying, the flow and the divine creation and potential of what we actually are, right? So let's go here next, because I know you speak about this too, Brent, this shifting out of the victim, right? Shifting out of victimhood and into more of sort of an empowering state. So any thoughts on, I know we've spoken about it in a couple of different ways today, but any other final thoughts on, liberating the inner victim that's inside of us?
You're right. We have talked about free will and at the granular level and getting curious and allowing for all the moments that seem incorrect and wrong to be filled with love. These are all real world and applicable, and I've seen it woven throughout my life. And part of the reason we haven't said it yet, but this book that I wrote is called Paper Cuts: The Art of Self-Delusion. And part of the reason it's called Paper Cuts, or the main reason, is that our history is like this Jenga stack of blocks, and there's holes in it, and there's ones that weren't placed properly, and the foundation's kind of weird and shaky, and we can push a block out and push another one in. That's how we change our truths and our delusions. And what we forget is that oftentimes we get to a point where we're depressed, our anxiety kicks in, or maybe ruminating about something that's happened in our past, or we feel stuck. And we complain to our friends, and maybe we drink too much, or we start going to the counselor or therapist, or we decide to go on a plant medicine journey, or we do something because we are desperate to find what it is. And what I've discovered is that there's almost never an it.
No.
But it has been death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah.
And it's these small choices that we either make or don't make or forget about. And they don't hurt in the moment because they're so small. But when you get 1,000 of them, the wound is so big now, you don't see where it originally started from. And it keeps going.
Mm. The beautiful image of, often when it keeps going, that circles back to what we spoke about a second ago. That's where the bigger pain teacher comes in, right? It'll come in as a cancer diagnosis, or it'll come in as a divorce, or it'll come in as your business coming to an end. And we'll often take it as, oh, that is all the things that are outside that are going wrong. This has nothing to do with me. But in your words, it's come from using our free will with no judgment, but making the choice to ignore, right? Making the choice to suppress, making the choice to pretend, making the choice to numb, making the choice to look outside of oneself rather than asking the deeper questions. Brent, I want to really acknowledge you and the beautiful soul that you are, and the deepness that you have in your heart. If people want to connect into this deepness and they want to tune into your book, where can people find it? And is there anything else you want to speak to about the book in itself before we wrap up?
if you're listening and you are at a place where you have not found permission in your life to go deeper, to explore the nooks and crannies, if there's anything this book does, it's not prescriptive. It's not a how-to guide. There's no 1, 2, do 1, 2, and 3, and you're gonna be perfect. Your life's gonna be amazing. It's it really, if anything, it gives permission to explore yourself, to go deeper. And I wrote the book for me, and it was cathartic and amazing in my journey. And I think many of you listening will find your own story hidden inside of my story, and the 20 other people that have their story told in this book. And finding permission is the first step. Allowing that for yourself to then get curious. So if you want to know more, I'm doing some other work too, through my kind of next step in my life, which is through my website, the number 3, the letter X, and bold. So 3xbold.com. You can find me there.
I love it. And I'll put all the links and connections to Brent and where to find his book. I think the book is on the website too. I checked it out, and it's on all retailers. So check it out, tune in, tap in. And, one of the reasons I felt compelled to talk to you today, Brent, just for people tuning in, is I think as people have been able to see, we speak different words, we package these teachings with our own unique expressions, but the truth is the truth, right? The divine truth is the divine truth. And for everyone that's either read my book or have listened to these episodes, I think you'll find a lot of resonance to what Brent is saying. So, Brent, I appreciate you. My last question for you today before I let you go. This is the Cosmic Love Antenna, and we've referenced it already today, but I want to pass by you. Often I refer to love not just as a feeling and emotion, but as a consciousness state and a higher power that we can all tune into and tap into. So I'm wondering, in your world, Brent, how do you define that love word personally?
For me, love is when we are able to really see somebody else and ourselves. Because when we do that, when we're sitting next to the person we love, to see them, there's no judgment, there's no control, there's just understanding that they've lived their life, that they've experienced what they've experienced, and how they show up, how they react. All the pieces are because of what they've experienced in their life. And that's seeing them. And that's sitting there in love and appreciating all that is.
It's beautiful, Brent. I'm smiling so much because I did a video yesterday on this, what you're talking about, the facet of love. How I would describe what you just beautifully outlined is it's compassion, right? And compassion in many ways is having an empathetic heart, meaning that if I open my heart to Brent in whatever he's expressing himself in this moment, and it might not be resonating with me, but if I apply compassion, I see that if I had lived Brent's life, if I had made the same choices with my free will as Brent had done, then I would be in that situation too, right? And that opens that compassion piece of love that you just beautifully highlighted. I appreciate you, Brent. I love you very much. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your book and your resources. For everyone that's tuning in, please see the show notes to connect to Brent deeper and check out his book. For everyone that's joined live, thank you for your attention and your love. I see your beautiful comments and your eyes as always. But until next time here on the show, both Brent and I love you very much. We send you love, we send you light, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye, everyone.